Good afternoon, everyone. We are beginning our webinar now, tying our research root to our research roots. This is the beginning of a book study with the authors, sponsored by the HighScope Board of Directors. I'm Jana Martella. I'm happy to see all of you. It's exciting to see the numbers growing. Over the course of the next number of months, actually, we will be taking a deep dive into Don't Look Away, Embracing Anti-Bias Classrooms. We'll be meeting on the third Wednesday of every month, beginning at 2 o'clock Eastern. Welcome to all of you on the West Coast. It's morning for you, and for everyone here on the East Coast, happy afternoon to you. Over the course of the next several months, we will be diving in and having discussions with the authors of Don't Look Away, which I'll introduce you to in a moment. But we'll also be going month by month into the pages, actually diving into some of the tips and recommendations that are made on topics such as developmentally appropriate practice, assessment, improving outcomes for dual language learners, driving language justice, engaging families in pursuing anti-bias practice from in their early childhood settings. So I hope that you'll place these dates on your calendars and that you will join with HighScope in this pursuit, very important pursuit at this time. Today, we get to have an opportunity to drive the momentum to racial justice and to have a discussion with the authors. I'm really thrilled to be a part of this. I'm talking to you from my library in Washington, D.C. You can see, don't look away, here behind me. I point out to you, hopefully you all have begun looking into the meaning of this book and have begun reading it. If you haven't, though, you can Google the title and the authors and certainly grab it off of Amazon at your leisure. I encourage you to do so, and then we will continue on this book study pursuit together, hopefully month by month, all the way to April. So next slide, please. Great, thank you. So for the next good bit of time, we are going to be spending together. I would encourage you, as questions come to mind around your own experience and around the book itself, if you've had an opportunity to look through it, to pose your questions and comments in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will hold the final 10 minutes of our hour together for Q&A from you as participants with the authors. I am privileged that I get the first half an hour or so with them to pose some questions for them. And I'll start with introducing them. I'm going to keep the introductions very brief. You can see where our speakers are speaking from based on their pictures and their subtitle there. Iheoma Iruka is at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, but I'd be remiss to not highlight that she was with HighScope for a number of years. And I'm sure that many of you have seen Stephanie and Iheoma all over the airwaves over the course of the last several months. And we actually will explore that a little bit. Stephanie Curenton, by the way, Iheoma is coming to us from North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And Stephanie Curenton is here from Boston. I'll let each of them introduce themselves in a little more depth. Tonia Durden at the Georgia State University may be joining us a little bit later. And then there also is downstream at another month, there'll be an opportunity for you all to meet at subsequent book study meetings to meet Kerry-Ann. So I think we'll head to the video view, if you don't mind, Katie. Thank you. And Iheoma and Stephanie, if you would turn off your mute buttons and share your videos with us. And if everybody would place I advise you to place your view on speaker view, and that way you'll see the three of us, and Iheoma and Stephanie will take it away and kind of responding to some questions. A brief reminder, as you guys think of questions or comments that you want to forward to Iheoma, Stephanie, possibly Tonia, please by all means enter them into the Q&A. I know some of you will be entering your questions in the chat. I'll start by saying this session is being recorded and it will be posted on the HighScope YouTube channel. Who knew that we would be engaged in a YouTube channel, right? So the first 10 minutes that I want to spend with both of you, and I'm delighted to do this. I have been coursing through this book and want to give you a little bit of background. Iheoma and I began talking about the possibility of this in-depth book study sometime around June, which was a remarkable time frame. The book was published in late April, and obviously it was in the works for quite some time before that. We will explore that a little bit now. But I'd like to ask both of you to do a little journey mapping, some kind of personal GPS, as it were. It's really remarkable to me, and I want to hear about your journey toward early childhood. Here we have these, very young, intelligent Black researchers. I'm happy to kind of explore this with you, but I'd be very interested, each of you, about your personal journey toward both early childhood and research, and along the way, what were some of the milestones to get you there? And Iheoma, we'll start first with you.
Sure. So I want to say thank you, Jana, for having us and having me back. I literally just left the organization. What's today? The 21st, 21 days ago. So it's so obviously excited to just come back home and engage this conversation with you and obviously the rest of the HighScope community. I would say that I don't know if it's a journey like that's straight. My journey is definitely not straight, but I would say that I grew up in Boston. So I grew up in Boston. I'm actually a BU alumni, but I don't claim often. But I'm at least in a year. That's why I did my master's there. But I would say that it really started as a young kid. I went to one of the public exam schools, and I remember a lot of my friends who were, mostly Black, girls and boys. Like there was, females and males. And by ninth grade, we entered in 7th grade. By ninth grade, a lot of us, or a lot of them, especially our Black male friends, were gone. And we were supposed to go there from 7th through 12th grade. And I just remember a lot of us came from single family homes. We lived in the projects, so we were all sort of had similar contexts. And those of us who graduated, and then went to college, for me, it was like, why? We all pretty much had a lot of similar backgrounds. We were, Black and from many different parts of the world, from the Black diaspora. And so that made me wonder, like, what's happening here? And I think that journey really took me obviously through college, and obviously then when I went to go do my PhD, I was like, what's going on? Is it because of families? I don't know. So I did a lot of my work at Head Start. I did at University of Miami with Darryl, and I really want to understand developmental science, and I'm an applied developmental psychologist, trying to understand what was in the pathway that some of us made it, quote unquote, and some of us did not make it through, at least through graduation. And I feel like when I got to Miami, the work we were doing was really focused on the younger age. And I didn't think that's what I was going to be. I would just want to do research. I wanted to understand what was happening, why. So for me, it was really about just uncovering the why. And so I think being able to do my doctorate work in Miami, and a lot of the work was really with Head Start families, really got me really into early childhood education. But for me, it was really about families. That's really where I felt like I centered myself in many ways, and not so much the programming. It's just the programming was a vehicle. And so I would say just throughout that space and entering UNC for a postdoc and staying on to, Nebraska, the Buffett Institute, and then obviously to HighScope, it's been centered there. But for me, it's always been a journey of the whys. Why is it that people who look like me don't have the same experiences or don't have the same outcomes? Why? So for me, the research question is really about why, and also trying to figure out then what, right? The so what question. So I would say that's really the journey that I feel like I'm still on. And I think being at high school is really helpful in that it helped me to draw me much more closer to the workforce, to the programming side of things, where I've mostly been on the system side of things and mostly on really just the research, more on the research and maybe systems building side of things. So I think being at high school helped to further ground me in terms of the actual practice and the practices in many ways. And so I think for me, my journey really is around is still asking the question of why, but now is really focused on the what. And I think the journey has been of also a discovery of what I did not know, even where I feel like I went to one of the best high schools allegedly in the state of Massachusetts, if not the global world. I feel like I was not fully educated. I did not fully understand, the ways that, racism worked. I did not understand the system. I mean, I live it, you breathe it, but you don't fully understand why you have people who are working hard, who are trying their best with what they have, and I still in that circle of poverty like we were in. And so for me, the journey is not just professional, it's actually a personal journey in many ways, and trying to understand what is it that keeps putting some of us still in the same position, even though we've gotten the education, we've done all the work, we worked 3 jobs. And so why are we all still in the same position that our relatives were in, our parents, our grandparents were in? And that's the journey that I'm on, to eradicate this sort of systemic inequities, and particularly systemic racism.
Thank you, Yoma, and thank you for bringing it down to the personal level through your history. We all have to be in a personal space around this topic, right? All of us. So thank you for that. Stephanie, you're next up.
Okay. So, when I think about what brought me to this journey of being a developmental psychologist who specializes in the early childhood period, I would kind of say I was sort of born to do this. Like, I know when I was in 6th grade, I decided I wanted to be a psychologist. And I've basically been involved in Head Start my whole life. I went to Head Start as a child. I used to volunteer in Head Start as a high school student. And I remember the first time I went to a Head Start program as a high school student and I was volunteering because at that point, the Head Start centers would close during the summer and you would have to clean the whole room and pack away the toys. And so I was there volunteering to help do that. And as I stepped into the classroom and I saw the materials, I remembered them. So I was this, I don't know, 16 or 17-year-old in this classroom, and I saw these materials and I thought, and it all came back to me, and I said, oh my gosh, I remember this. I remember playing with this. And that moment was just so special for me that it really made me, it really solidified for me that this early childhood period is just a special period of curiosity for me. And so when I went to on to my doctoral program, I was just interested in all things in this early developmental period, everything from language development to family processes and social emotional development, et cetera. And I was always really interested as well in volunteering in early childhood educational programs. So I couldn't imagine myself anywhere else doing anything else.
Thank you. There was a shout out. What a great Head Start success story you are, Stephanie. So that is awesome. I'd like to have a follow-up question for both of you because you are, Stephanie, I don't know about your family situation, but I know, Iheoma, you have young children. And so I'm eager to hear if you have applied your research glasses to that pursuit. And Stephanie, if you have some follow-up on that as well.
Um,
I mean, go ahead, Steph. No, go, Steph. Go.
I was going to say, yes, I think about my research often as I'm interacting with my children. They often show me that textbook knowledge isn't the same thing as real world knowledge, often on an everyday basis. Um, but I do, I think that what my research background has helped me do and enjoy more as a parent is that I feel like I was fully present for every milestone, because I am a developmentalist. I understood sort of all these milestones, everything that they were going through. So I felt like it made me enjoy them, more. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I mean, I have a who just turned 4 and the 7-year-old who's actually the same age as Stephanie's second. And I would say that in many ways it helped prepare me, but it helped to not prepare me. I feel like is one thing when you sort of are seeped in family development, child development, and you know all the milestones, but then you also begin to sort of overthink it, like, should I have done this? And you tell your husband, well, what about this? So in some ways, I feel like sometimes I overthink it and I don't literally, I think like Stephanie, live in the moment. And I also feel like the book did not help me with my 4-year-old during this time, and not helping my 7-year-old during this time. So I feel like as much as the literature that we are seeped in tells us a lot of information generally, it doesn't tell you about your kids and how you are, because it's not just the child development, it's the family development. You're learning. Like I learned from the first one to do better with the second, hopefully. So I think it's one of those where some things, but you're like, they didn't teach me that. And they didn't teach me I was gonna act like this. Right. So some of the things I'm second guessing is, what kind of parent am I? Am I more authoritative, or am I more permissive? Like, so you're trying to sort of figure out who you are and how do you balance it to make sure it fits your child, especially in this kind of moment of both COVID-19. And of course, when you bring in the racial lens, I feel like a lot of our literature, in many ways, at least the ones that I feel like I had, did not fully, I think, for me, express how issues of racism are very present before and even during the early years. And I think that's something that we are really trying to make sure that we attend to, both as scholars in the field, but even for me as a parent, I really think so much about how much I was not informed about that piece of things.
And I would add one other thing. I think that being a parent actually makes me a better researcher when it comes to looking at things in terms of family processing and parenting, because I have a real world view and understanding of parenting now. Whereas
Yep.
before I had children, I was going off of the textbook and going off of the theory. And
Yep.
now when we are reading papers about family stress and work life balance, those things
Yep.
aren't theoretical anymore. They're real world.
Yeah,
Yes.
and even childcare quality, right? Like even the idea of, I'm like, no, that it sounded good, but no, this is really what I want, right? I think it even pushes us even in other dimensions of early childhood, like quality, what you want from your teacher, what you think the competence of your teacher should be. So I feel like it extends in so many spaces for the work that I do. Yes,
Evidence to practice and practice
that's right.
to research. In
That's
a
right.
galaxy far, far away and a long time ago, I was a primary grade teacher. Before marriage and children, I always thought that being a teacher would make me a better parent. But just like you, Stephanie, actually, now when I look at my 31 and 29-year-old, I know that I probably would have been a better teacher had I been a parent first. I guess. So thank you. Those are perfect answers and just the direction that I hoped this conversation would go. So next up, we're going to go a little bit more closely and explore the writing of your book. And I know many of the people from the board have written a ton of stuff, and I'm very interested in your process, how long you all have known each other, when you began putting your heads together and felt a need for writing this specific book. Tell us a little bit about what brought I know you'll be speaking on behalf of your colleagues, Tonia and Kerry-Ann, but what brought the four of you together? You may have written other things as well. And why did this moment in time bring you to the publication of Don't Look Away at the end of April?
So,
I
I'll just start real quick. I'll start. So I would say, how at least the four of us come together is probably it's interesting. In Nebraska, it's kind of the main stage in many ways. In that actually time, so Stephanie and I sort of knew each other, and we've actually written a textbook together for early child educators. I forgot what year that was, Stephanie. So I
It's,
can't remember 20.
oh,
Oh, when our kids, right before our kids were born.
seven,
Remember? So like 2012 or something like that. And that was an interesting meeting that we never actually met each other in person for several years, maybe a couple years, 2 or 3 years. So Stephanie and I knew kind of started having this obviously professional working relationship. And then actually I was in Nebraska. So that went to the Buffett Institute, the University of Nebraska. And that's why I actually met Tonia. Tonia was a faculty member at the University of Nebraska Lincoln. And so we met there. And then Kerry-Ann, obviously, as you could tell, also is the University of Nebraska Omaha, but she came later. But is that so when Stephanie, Tonia, when the three of us then got together, we felt this kismet in terms of sort of the way we sort of thought about the work. Obviously, you heard about Stephanie and her pedigree, and obviously Tonia does a lot as it concerns sort of educating teachers, particularly Black teachers, and really raising up sort of what she knows and what we know Black children need to be their best selves and excellence. And so that journey really, I would say Nebraska was kind of part of that in terms of how we sort of met. Do you want to add more, Stephanie, in terms of obviously then that journey has created a lot of different books that we've written. And obviously I can talk about Don't Look Away and kind of how that also in some ways actually started in Nebraska. So as sort of I was in Nebraska, I was approached by a publisher to sort of say, we want to sort of lean in on this issue of talking about, issues of racism and anti-bias. And before that, Stephanie and I actually wrote a book on anti-bias culture responsive practices for families. And so it was a book that we co-authored together, interestingly with my mother. Yeah, so the book that we co-authored, and so when she approached me about writing this book, I was actually still in Nebraska, and we the three of us, really, me, Stephanie, and Tanya, really came together and really felt like this is the moment. What we wanted to do is sort of go on this journey where we know that we have also been on our own journey, right? Really trying to raise up the issue of anti-bias, anti-racism, and knowing that we all have specialties, right? Where obviously Stephanie has her specialty really around language, around thinking about these processes in ecology, and Tanya's really around the teachers and the workforce and the educator. And I'm probably much more on sort of the sort of the history, the systems, that sort of, and families. And that's so you can see the journey of the book. And then Kerry-Ann came in later because we really wanted to make sure that we represented the African diaspora in so many ways, both for those who are part of the sort of African Americans versus obviously those from more of the diaspora. So we felt like we want to sort of round it up with more of that, what happens in the classroom, a sort of observational piece of things around anti-racism in the classroom. And so Kerry-Ann helped to round that up in many ways. And so many ways, I feel like what the journey was really one of those of where we all just came together in a very, what I would assume is just how it's supposed to be. And we all put our touch on the book wherever our expertise lie. Stephanie, you want to add more in terms of sort of what you felt about sort of the journey of getting this book and where it came in 2020? Oh, you're muted, honey.
sorry about that. Before I get to the journey of the book, I want to tell you a funny story from way back when Iheoma and I first met each other. So this is about 7 years ago, and we were writing our very first book together because we've written, I don't know how many now, like 4 or 5, I can't even think. But the funny thing is that we are writing this book together. This was before Zoom, so we're only having phone calls, to discuss different things. And the funny thing is that we were both pregnant at the same time, due about the same time, and we're both frantically, manically working on this book. And we never told each other. It was like basically at the end of the book, we're like, oh, I guess I can go and have my baby in peace now. And then what? I'm pregnant too. So I just thought that was so funny that we're both doing that, and we had never mentioned it to each other. And then just for this book, yeah, I remember Iheoma was approached by someone, and I just remember when she came to me to talk with me about it, to say, "Hey, Steph, do you want to do this with me?" My first question was sort of like, "Can we? Are they really going to let us do it? Like, are we really going to be able to do it, to speak the truth, and to really come to the table in a way that is meaningful and change the discourse?" And I said, if they are really ready, then yes, sign me up.
So thank you so much. That's great. I also, somebody kind of, you know, zapped into the chat that this was your destiny to be working together while pregnant, which is interesting, right?
Yes.
So I'm eager to hear a little bit about the process and the writing process as you guys were looking across the landscape and saying, these are the most important things that we really need to address. And here's where we should weave them through. Stephanie, I love that you said, okay, give us our voice to express what we know to be true and what we know to be just and right for vulnerable children in order to drive toward equity. I don't know about the editors for your book, but you obviously were editors for each other. Did you have some pushback with each other? Did you arrive at some decision points that you had to agree upon as you guys were writing?
So I think that, fortunately, we were pretty in sync, the whole time when we were doing it. I actually don't have any memory of not being in sync. I always say now that Iheoma and Tanya I don't ever want to do anything else with anyone else except Iheoma and Tanya. And I remember we started with an outline and, I remember getting the outline and I did, what I do, which Iheoma knows where I'm moving stuff around and doing all of these different things. And that's why we can work together because she lets me be me. And we just all kind of fell in sync because we know what the story is. We know and we agreed what the story is that we wanted to tell. So I think it was like pretty easy. And then in terms of our editor, I would say that we do want to give a big shout out to Stephanie Roselli from Griffin House, who was our editor, who's actually one of the best editors that I've ever worked with. And she did push back, on us about about everything. And but it was great. It made the book just even better. And I mean, people who are not even early childhood educators read this book. Isn't that what you told me? You said that there are some people who are not even early childhood educators who are buying this book and reading it. So people just love it. They love the tone, they love the style, they love the artwork. I remember the day when we picked out the picture. Do you remember that day when they
Yes.
work for the picture? And this is the only cover that they had to show us because we knew that day, yes, this is it.
I
think I was going to just add quickly that I think that is what was important for us. In many ways, the book is a journey for people to go on, but it also showed the level of comfort that we didn't have to go sort of these meetings with each other. We just saw our outline and we literally knew our story. And I think that's important, that for us it was really an easy sort of process because we literally understood each other. Mind you, some of us were already mothers, some of us were about to be mothers in different spaces. But I think because we understood, the one thing about the story that Stephanie told when we wrote our first book is that we were pregnant. But the reason why we didn't tell each other, because we didn't want people to use our pregnancy as an excuse for why we don't work, right? We were so conscientious that here, knowing that, but mind you, we knew the stats on sort of the maternal mortality, the infant mortality for Black mothers. And so we also understood also the narrative about, Black people being lazy. We were like, nope, we are writing this book and it doesn't matter. So I think we understood, we knew that. And so many ways we think of us as sisters from another mother and father, because we really do connect on so many different levels. But we don't have to send a lot of messages. We know in some ways what each other's thinking. Again, we have different perspectives and unique perspectives, but they're shared in many ways that doesn't require a whole lot of conversations to sort of get that across. And of course, Stephanie Roselli, our editor, and the whole Griffin team, I think, did a really, really nice job. And I because the book was really started in 2017, 2018, in many ways. We were kind of, we just took our time a little bit. And so the fact that they saw the vision of where we're trying to go, and it came out at the time that it did, right? Nobody anticipated COVID-19, anticipated, the awakening, I would say mostly white people, around issues of racism. So this is one of those where it was obviously great timing, both in terms of the book, but really in terms of us and how we know that it's a journey, and that part of the journey is not about telling you exactly what to do, but it's about really helping people to question themselves in what they've been doing in many ways. So we don't give all these answers. We say you need to go on the journey with us, and include others amongst your network and peers, et cetera.
And another thing that I would just add too about sort of the book and the timeliness of the book. In the initial part, in the first few pages of the book, we have a paragraph that is talking about a lot of the police brutality against Blacks. And I think we even list, I think we're listing
Yes.
names. And what is so, I guess it's beautiful, but it's also sad, at this point, is that we created that chapter and we were doing this to call out sort of that police brutality back when we're drafting this book. And this is the sad part, is that it's so sad that we're still here a year later, still talking about this and still having to deal with the same problem. So
So there are so many things to kind of springboard from what you said. We will dive into the last 4 months or so, kind of combined from George Floyd and in the midst of COVID in a little bit toward the end of our conversation. But I love the picture of collaboration that you guys have painted of the story of this book. Any practice, right? And also that it was a personal journey for each of you. Any practice at its soundest level is going to be authentic, derived from our person, but also collaborative, right? Whether it's teaching or writing a book, collective impact of putting minds and hearts together is going to result in a better outcome, particularly for kids of color, but for all kids as well. So thank you. That was just a great discussion. I'm going to ask you in your writing process, and I opened with highlighting that this book group is going to really get into the content of the book, the recommendations of the book across different content areas over time. So we will become more experts in this content over the next 7-8 months for sure. And we'll weave throughout the pages, not chapter by chapter. The various chapters have things to say about developmentally appropriate practice or about harsh discipline or et cetera. So we're going to do that exploration. But I presume because some of you probably took the lead on different chapters, we'll advise people to read this book over and over again. Do you have a favorite chapter or a favorite topic area that you would recommend people go to over and over again?
I don't like. I feel like it's meant to be read from the beginning to the end. And what I would just say about you when you said that some of us took the lead on different chapters, that was part of our outline. That is the way we outlined it. But the reality is that once we got into the writing process and once we worked with the editor, she moved things around. So Stephanie moved things around to the point where there are sections that I wrote that are now in the first chapter or the ending chapter, et cetera. And so it's really not, it's really fluid. It's more fluid than what we typically think of when we think of sort of, handbook versus handbook chapters or the traditional academic sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Not
I would totally agree. Yeah. I would totally agree with that. It definitely is much more of that. And I mean, I feel like I don't have a favorite chapter. I feel like is that there's chapters for the moments, right? It's almost like a book you would read. Like there are moments, right, where you're like, I feel like, yep, this is me today. This moment is a Monday chapter. There's a Sunday chapter. So I feel like is that kind of book for me. It's a full book that I think should definitely be read fully, because anything about bias, racism, it's about the whole thing. You have to literally go on the journey, right? And this is a journey that you want to go through the journey, no matter whether you're an educator, whether you're a principal, whatever it is. It's a journey, and I want people to see it as that, because their questions are different depending on what part of the book you're in. And so I actually would say you should just go on the journey. And Tanya is with us.
Thank you. Right, Tanya, welcome. You can unmute yourself. I do want to kind of highlight something that just came in the chat as we begin this process. What's the first steps to encouraging racial justice or anti-bias with toddlers. That's a question we'll get to later in the Q&A, but I wanted to shout it out. Tonia, welcome. You can see that we're kind of in the midst of telling the story of how you guys came together to write this book, and your colleagues have been talking all about you and how much time you've spent together. And you have been introduced as from your space in Georgia. So maybe if you want to just give a shout out to everybody, and we'll begin. If there are any of the previous questions, you kind of saw them in the outline that you would like to speak to, you can do that now, but then we'll draw you into the rest of the conversation.
Well, hello. Sorry that I had to join. This work is important work, and I do it, and we all do it in every element, whether we're working with early childhood professionals or even in our own work in academia. And so I was just on a call, I was presenting about the need for us to recruit a president of color. And we were talking about pay equity issues, and we were talking about a lot of the systemic racism that Black faculty face. And so this is an issue that just not impacts early childhood professionals and young children, but also even as Black scholars and in academia, it impacts us as well. We have to continue to speak up and speak out about it. In terms of how this book was kind of originated, Iheoma and Stephanie are amazing. So I just follow them wherever they go. And whatever they tell me to do, I'm there. So that's how it came about. They said, hey, we have this concept, we have this book, we got to get this voice out. And I just said, what do you need me to do? And I was there. And so really from my perspective, that's how I joined this amazing circle of dynamic young ladies.
So thank you, Tonia. We actually have drawn the same conclusion in the half hour we've spent with your fellow authors, and are really happy that you have joined. We just left off with this idea at how this is an example of deep and powerful collaboration that comes from a personal space. So all of you are individuals, but obviously you have put your individuality to good use in the pages of this book, and we will be continuing in those pages. So the book was published in April. Stephanie, you remarked about the year-long process that brought you to April, but think of all of the water that has gone under the bridge since that time, and the light that has shone on the idea. I've been working in Title I and Head Start since 1985 for the last, 35 years, and the onion keeps getting peeled over the course of these last 4 months. I also have seen all of you in a million different places since June. It's an unfortunate circumstance that brought this to the fore, because I think, and also very timely. And so I would love to hear from each of you about the last 4 or 5 months that you have been on, either together or individually, and what things have come to you as a result of your being in a million Zoom meetings and addressing the key issues of Don't Look Away, and kind of lessons learned or spaces that you want to go to next. Tonia, if you're ready, we haven't heard much from you yet, so if you would like to just tell us what you've learned over the course of the last 4 or 5 months since Don't Look Away was published.
Well, I've learned a lot. I've learned that there is, first of all, I'll take a step back. As I mentioned earlier, these young ladies, and Kerry-Ann isn't here, but they feed my spirit. Not only do we speak the same language in terms of anti-bias, anti-racist education, and this is our life's work, but these are truly my sisters. And every time we convene, it's as if no one else is in the room. We talk, we connect. It's a healing process. And academia, not only for my spirit and my soul, but also I learn something new every time I'm in the presence of these young ladies. And that's where you know you're really in the presence of brilliance and excellence. And so every time we have these conversations, I not only learn from my colleagues and my sisters, but also from the audience as well, with a lot of the inquiries and the questions. It also gives me strength, momentum, because this work is exhausting, to move forward. Just this morning, I have been preparing to do a presentation exact on this topic, on our book, Don't Look Away, Anti-Bias Education, at an institution for early care providers. And so I was asked to present or to submit my presentation. And so I thought it was odd, but I submitted it. And then I just this morning got feedback and said, oh, okay, well, your presentation fits our criteria. With the new executive order, we just wanted to make sure you're not going to mention anything about US being racist, about white privilege, and about implicit bias. And I was outraged because that's my lens, that's our work, that's what we do. And I was furious. And then I, immediately emailed my sister girlfriends who are here on this call and said, oh my goodness, how do I respond? Because this message is important, this work is important. However, I cannot be censored, and I will not be censored. And so spaces like this has really helped to recenter me and refocus and say, okay, we have a whole chapter in here. What if educators changed the world? Okay, that's one of our chapters. And so this is my opportunity to educate and to move on and to decline and say, at this time, I cannot, do this presentation, regardless of what the benefits may be for those early childhood professionals who would hear work about anti-bias education. Because the very stance of saying you cannot present or discuss or say that, our world and our framework is racist counters everything that we talk about in this book. And so I provided that example to say I needed this. I often need these kind of conversations to refocus me and reshift and say the work that you're doing is not falling on deaf ears. That regardless of what policy or things that are going on out there, this work is important. And it really is about our survival physically, intellectually, emotionally, and the survival of our children as well.
Thank you so much. And it's also words and definitions and the idea that we name things what they are. Mm-hmm. And that's very important. Iheoma and Stephanie, you guys can do some back and forth as well about the things that you've learned or things that have risen to top of mind since June.
I just want to say, it's obviously just glad to have Tonia join us because I would say, the word that we're sisters, but the word that I know, Stephanie, you need to trademark immediately is frolic, right? We are friends and colleagues and sister, that we're so much more. And I think exactly what Tonia said about the fact that this work is exhausting on so many levels when you're sort of the one or one of very few, and to be able to come into this village, right? Our sisterhood in a way that just you can be yourself and lay your burdens down and to get energized and the brilliance. Tonia did not mention that she is a mother of 3 children under the age of 4, and none of them are twins or triplets or quadruplets. But this means that and that's why I say, and that this means that this journey is not just, it's one of those where we understand the work that we do may not be loved, right? We wrote the book without even thinking whether people are going to like it, hate us, whatever. It was about the truth. And so for, the sort of the story that Tonia just mentioned in terms of the request to come speak and to not speak the truth is one where we cannot not speak the truth, right? This means that in many ways that we may become ostracized but that doesn't matter because it's about making sure that we are telling the truth and because it's based on history, it's based on facts, it's based on our knowledge, our ancestors' knowledge, our elders' knowledge. And I think that's something that we will continue to do. And being able to have our sisterhood allows us to do that. That even if we're being crucified or being threatened or whatever it may be, we know that we are going to come in this safe circle that will continue to energize us and continue to keep us moving forward, whether we're pregnant or got 3 babies at home. And so, so I think that there's nothing more to add. I think, Tanya just said it, and I know I am very privileged to be part of them and to have them be part of me. So very, very privileged.
The
Stephanie.
Yeah, so the only thing that I would add to the story is there is a quote from one of my favorite books. The book is called The Alchemist. And the book says that when you're on the right path, the road rises to meet you. And I feel as though this book and being able to create this piece of art, for the world with these ladies is confirmation that I am on the right path, that we are on the right path, because this book it's changing the world. It's changing the world. And when we sat down to create it, remember I told you all that our hearts and our spirits when we sat down to create it was, can we really say what we want to say? Can we really have a voice? And so our intention was just to express the truth. We didn't think about, is it going to be successful? Is it going to sell? Are people going to like it? Our goal was to live our truth and to put that truth out in the world. And we have done that. And because we are on the right path, the road is rising up to meet us. And this book is really the gift that we had wanted for the world.
Tanya, any reflections having heard your colleagues address this tight bond that you have?
It's real. It runs deep and it's real. And I am because we are because I am.
So thank you, all three of you, actually. We are going to open up for questions from the audience. I want to reserve audience. I know that we'll not get to all of these questions, but Katie is downloading the chat and the Q&A for us, and we'll have other occasions to join the authors month by month. I love this idea of the road rising to meet you guys. In fact, I think that there's been, that we're on that, we can be on that road with you. So thank you for providing this book to us. I also love the idea of you asking questions. I think your research base gets you to truth, right? And supports the idea of truth. The facts of history are the facts of history, and we need to study them. And there's solid ground to stand on in terms of practice for young children, for young Black children, for young brown children, and for all children. So thank you for that. This is fantastic. So I am going to pull up the Q&A. Hopefully some have been queued up a little bit, and I'm going to ask all three of our authors to kind of open their mics and to get ready. And I'll start.
You need to ask if they're ready, because we really just say what we want to say. So it's a group ready for our responses.
So here's one that I find interesting. Did the publishers really let you tell all the truth as you hoped they would?
I would say again, I feel like a book is sort of, it's a work of art in many ways, in that you can't put everything in, because we have some parameters we have to work through in terms of even the length, right? So I would say that I wouldn't say I think that we wrote what we thought was important. We wrote, the essence of who we are is in the book in terms of what we wanted the field to know at this point in time, within the parameters that this was really crafted for the early childhood, practitioner and professional. So it was with that in mind. And so I would say it wasn't a let. I think in many ways they were like, what do you want to write? What do you all want to talk about as it concerns issues of just equity writ large, right? And we put our stamp in. And I feel like the book really is, as we described earlier, is really what we wanted to write, obviously with the parameters in mind and and the specific publisher. And so I would say that there wasn't a censorship. I think we just needed to make sure that we were able to sort of write it in the sort of the language, write it within the parameters of sort of just even the page limits, right? Because it's about page limits as well. And of course, they want to make sure that it reached the audience, right? It's not about just us writing our personal, sort of diary, but it's also to make sure that it was really useful for the field. And so we have to obviously think about what is the use of this and how could it be beneficial beyond us, beyond its own time. And so I wouldn't say that it was it was like they were like, we love it, we want it, and so here it is. And they just helped to make sure that it really sort of was edited well. I think they did a lot of more of the editing and shifting and some of that sort of editorial work. But I would say the words, the language, even capitalization of the B's, right? Like the blacks, like those. So there's certain things that we were like, no, right? So I think in many ways, it was one of those where exactly, right? It was one of those where I really do feel like it wasn't sort of like the editor told us what you can and can't write, but we were like, we want this. This is a must for us. So I think there were many areas where we were all connected, both the editors and ourselves, and things that we really thought was important no matter what. And so I think in the end of it, they were open really to that. And again, Stephanie Roselli and the whole Griffin team have been really supportive of both the work, but also this area of work. And I want to give them sort of a very clear shout out that they are really supportive of this work. And there's not a lot of publishers, I would say, who are in this space of early childhood and talking about any issues around bias and anti-racism. So for me, I will always champion them to do that. And I will just say with this time that I know I will be embarking on a sort of another book with HighScope in mind. So I do think that we understand that this work is one of clearly will open the door for many. And we hope that there are others that will write the book, just like we stand on many shoulders. We obviously hope that people use this book as sort of a start to build in more literature and more work for the early child community with this lens in mind.
So thank you. To get to another question, Carmen asks how we can help families to focus on the strengths in the book and for the journey. I want to highlight that we actually are going to have an entire session focused on family engagement and families throughout the book. So let's put a hold on that one for now. But there is a question, I'm not sure, I know it's addressed in the book, but it might not be addressed necessarily in, we'll dive a little deeper on developmentally appropriate practice. How can you have a discussion that is age appropriate as a teacher and a parent with young children? So what's the lesson of don't look away directly for children?
Well, that's a great question. So in the book, we provide lots of scenarios that are real life scenarios. And again, Iheoma mentioned that I have 3 little kids. So I have a 5-month-old, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And so, and we have race conversations all the time, even with my 5-month-old. I am very sure to talk to him and discuss with him and show him pictures of where he's from, his excellence, his ancestry, etc. So we have these type of positive racial identity discussions all the time. And so a part of what we talk about and one of our focuses was for this book is we really wanted to be very relatable. We wanted to be explicit and unapologetically focus on anti-racism and anti-bias. So we provide real life scenarios, some of them are personal where, this actually happened with our children and how we navigated it in a developmentally appropriate way with our children. Some of these are actual professional instances as well. And so that's often a misnomer that, well, these topics are too complex, too abstract for young children, when indeed we know that that's not the case, both in theory, in research, and in practice, that they see the biases, they see isms, they definitely understand the concept as early as 2 of fairness and unfair. And we know, of course, even in the womb, children have preferences and understand about the voice and the annotation, of caregivers. And when they're born, of course, the preferences of skin tone and caregivers who look like them. So we know that these developing racial identities, these developing isms occur at a very early age. And I must note, children have theories about how the world works. They have hypotheses and they have theories. And it is our responsibility as early childhood educators when we see something or hear something that is biased or that's racist or that is even against their own positive racial self identity, we have to stop, pause, and address it immediately.
Thank you. A further question is if you could do some definitional distinction between anti-bias and anti-racism, and that can be for all three of you. I know you've thought about it. Tonia, you're already on mic'd, so you can jump in first, or you know.
Okay, well, I'll be very brief. This will be a really great question for Kerry-Ann, who's not here because her whole body of work is on anti-racism. But just my take on it is this is actually one of the things that we had a very, very back and forth conversation about when we were writing the book of, you know, anti-bias versus anti-racism. Did we just say racism? You know, because anti-bias, from my perspective, has also been it's been safe to use the word anti-bias. That's very safe. Let's create an anti-bias classroom instead of just saying, you know what, this is racist. We are in a racist classroom, a racist world, and what you just did was racist. It's fine. Let's identify it. Let's address it. Let's move on. And so we really did have this conversation about this term anti-bias versus anti-racism. But one of the things I think you'll find is that throughout the book, we operationalize very clearly what we mean by anti-bias.
Thank you.
Stephanie, you want to add anything? Stephanie, you're muted.
Yeah. And I would just say, I agree with what Tonia is saying, is that is our frame and our focus. And I think that anti-bias is more of a global term because it touches on a lot of different areas of bias. And I have to say, when we, again, like we said, this is years in the making when we started this book. And so when we're starting this book in 2017 and writing it in 2018, people weren't using the word anti-racist, anti-racism. They weren't using those terms the way that they are now. And so to go back to what Tonia said about sort of safety, right? It was like at the time when we were, you know, entering into this this endeavor, the term that everyone was using was anti-bias, and that term has historical roots in our field, and it was a safe term, as Tonia was saying. And I think, I mean, I know for me, I hate to say this, I don't know what Stephanie's going to say. If I had it to do over again, I would call it anti-racist. I would put anti-racist in the title. But hindsight is 2020, and we're in a different age now. We're in a different age now where people know that word, and people aren't going to run away from that word the way they would have in 2017.
And I would just add to the whole entire question. And again, the don't look away which is the biggest part of the book, is that we also want people to just embrace it. We want to make sure that the community was at least able to open the book, right? At least get the book, open the book, and then you can now see racism and anti-racism all kind of in it. And I would still say that anti-racism and anti-bias, really, they sort of really, if you think about how racism is obviously the construction of the system, right? Policies and rules that really create a sort of a system that privileges one and oppresses another. And bias, all bias does is kind of repurpose that and sort of perpetuate it. So in many ways, bias is sort of a form of racism. It's just the bias is just exactly the word that people feel comfortable with saying in many spaces, especially in education. But really, bias is actually a form of racism, right? Because you're basically reaffirming and continuing the systemic inequities in sort of either as interpersonal and in individual spaces. But I would say yes, we want to use that word to just bring people in. And I think that would be the one thing I would change as well, Stephanie, is to make push even more. But again, it was a journey. I feel like in many ways, again, the book is just like it's a journey for a society, it's a journey for us, right? And so we were in a journey in a particular time. And if we were to write a book 3 years from now, there's a whole nother world that especially as we grow as a country, in terms of understanding what is racism, right, versus what is somebody who's just mean and discriminatory or stereotypical in their ways, right? We become much more precise with our language the more we can continue to push. And that's the job of sort of, I would say, authors, that you continue to push. It's almost like scaffolding, right? You push as sort of people get much more educated about certain things, and you can continue to move on that journey as a collective.
Thank you, Iheoma. I think that unfortunately we are at the end of the hour, and I want to course through all of these questions. The good news is that this idea of identifying disparities and then addressing them and calling out and naming things for what they are, this is not the end of that journey. So we're going to join each other. Some of the authors will join us. Other experts from the board will also be joining us. The next session is November 18th, 2:00 Eastern. That's a Wednesday. Huge thank you to the three of you for being here today. Katie's going to show you guys some closing slides so that you are aware. We will bring some of these questions to our succeeding sessions on Don't Look Away. The objective when Iheoma and I first began discussing this is that we weren't going to we were not going to look away, right, Iheoma? We're going to continue to drive toward this topic. The recording will be posted tomorrow. You'll also get some information and follow up on next month's session. There is a certificate of attendance that also will be sent to you at the conclusion of the session. I can't say thank you enough to our authors and speakers and experts. So I'll just close at the 3:00 hour with gratitude and with encouragement that we get to continue on this journey together. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Shay, thank you.